The pastel pink and blue streamers hung perfectly from the ceiling of our living room, catching the afternoon sunlight that streamed through the bay windows. I stood back, admiring the decorations I'd spent the entire morning arranging. Everything had to be perfect for Sarah's baby shower. She was my best friend since college, and this was her first child after years of trying. "Mia, you've outdone yourself," Sarah said, waddling into the room with her hand pressed against her lower back. At 7 months pregnant, she glowed with that ethereal beauty that seemed to follow expectant mothers everywhere. "I can't believe you did all this," I smiled, smoothing down my emerald green dress, the one David had bought me for our anniversary last month. "You deserve it, honey. Besides, it gave me practice for when it's my turn." The words slipped out before I could stop them, and I felt a familiar pang in my chest. David and I had been trying for 2 years now, with no success. The fertility specialist had run every test imaginable, and everything came back normal. Unexplained infertility, they called it, as if giving it a name made the monthly disappointment any easier to bear. Sarah reached over and squeezed my hand. "Your time will come, Mia, I know it will." The doorbell rang, saving me from having to respond. Soon, our living room was filled with the chatter and laughter of 20 women, all cooing over Sarah's growing belly and sharing pregnancy horror stories that made her eyes widen with mock terror. I played the perfect hostess, refilling glasses of sparkling cider and making sure everyone had enough of the petit fours I'd ordered from the fancy bakery downtown. David appeared in the doorway around 3 o'clock, his tie loosened and his dark hair slightly mussed from work. He was supposed to stay upstairs until the party was over. This was strictly a ladies-only affair, but he'd probably come down for a snack. He had a habit of doing that during my events, claiming he was just passing through while obviously hoping to snag some food. "Sorry, ladies," he said with that charming smile that had first caught my attention at a mutual friend's wedding 5 years ago. "Don't mind me, just grabbing some water." "Déjeuner." But instead of heading to the kitchen, he lingered in the doorway, his eyes scanning the room with an odd intensity. I noticed several of the women shift uncomfortably in their seats. Margaret, Sarah's cousin, actually avoided looking at him entirely, suddenly becoming very interested in the gift she was unwrapping. "David," I said with a laugh that sounded forced even to my own ears, "we're in the middle of the gift opening. Can this wait?" He didn't move. If anything, his smile grew wider, but there was something cold about it now, something that made my stomach clench with unease. "Actually, I think this is perfect timing." His voice carried across the room, cutting through the nervous chatter. "All of Sarah's closest friends and family are here, all the people who matter." The room fell silent. Sarah looked between David and me, confusion clear on her face. I felt heat rising in my cheeks as 20 pairs of eyes turned toward us, waiting for whatever was about to unfold. "David, what are you doing?" I whispered, but he heard me anyway. "I'm just wondering," he said, his voice carrying a casual tone that didn't match the tension radiating from his body. "How long everyone was planning to keep pretending. How long you were all going to let Mia live in her little fantasy world." My heart started pounding so hard, I was sure everyone could hear it. "What are you talking about?" He looked around the room again, and I followed his gaze. Margaret was staring at her hands. Jenny, Sarah's sister, had gone pale. Even Mrs. Henderson, Sarah's elderly neighbor, was shifting uncomfortably in her chair. The only person who looked genuinely confused was Sarah herself, who was struggling to push herself up from the couch. "David, stop!" Sarah said firmly. "Whatever this is about, this isn't the time or place." But David ignored her. His eyes found mine across the room, and for a moment I saw something that looked almost like pity. "The thing is, Mia," he said slowly, "you're the only one who doesn't know." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Know what?" My voice came out as barely a whisper. "About the baby," he said, and suddenly the room felt like it was spinning. "About whose baby Sarah is really carrying." I looked at Sarah, expecting her to jump to my defense, to tell David he was being ridiculous, to laugh off whatever sick joke this was supposed to be. But Sarah's face had gone white, and her hand was pressed protectively over her belly. She wasn't looking at me. She wasn't looking at anyone. "What are you saying?" I managed to ask, though part of me already knew. Part of me had always known, buried deep in my subconscious, where I'd refused to let the thought fully form. David's smile was gone now, replaced by something that might have been regret. "I'm saying that while you've been planning the perfect baby shower for your best friend, you've been celebrating the fact that your husband got another woman pregnant." The room erupted into chaos. Someone gasped. Someone else started crying. I heard Sarah saying, "No, no, no," over and over again, but her voice sounded like it was coming from very far away. The petit fours I'd eaten earlier rose in my throat, and I had to swallow hard to keep from being sick right there in front of everyone. "That's not," I started to say, but the words died in my throat, because suddenly everything made horrible, perfect sense. The way David had been distant lately. The way he'd suddenly become so interested in Sarah's pregnancy, asking detailed questions about her doctor's appointments and offering to help with things that should have been her husband Mark's responsibility. The way Sarah had been avoiding my eyes for weeks now, claiming she was just tired whenever I asked if something was wrong. Mark. Where was Mark? Sarah's husband should have been here, should have been part of this conversation, unless... "Where's Mark?" I asked, my voice sounding strange and hollow. Sarah finally looked at me, tears streaming down her face. "He left me," she whispered. 3 months ago, when he found out the baby wasn't his." The room was spinning faster now. I gripped the back of the nearest chair, my knuckles white against the fabric. "How long?" I asked David. "How long has this been going on?" 8 months, he said quietly. "It started as just, we were both having problems. You and I were struggling with the fertility issues, and Mark was always traveling for work, leaving Sarah alone. We were just friends at first, just talking, supporting each other. But then you decided to destroy everything," I finished for him. "You decided to get my best friend pregnant while I was desperately trying to have your baby." The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. While I'd been charting my ovulation, taking vitamins, scheduling my life around the possibility of conception, my husband had been creating the family I dreamed of with someone else. And not just someone else. Sarah, the person I'd confided in about every failed pregnancy test, every disappointing doctor's visit, every moment of grief when my period arrived right on schedule, month after month. "Mia, please," Sarah said, struggling to stand. "Let me explain. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. We never meant for you to find out this way." "But you did mean for it to happen," I said, my voice growing stronger with anger. "You meant for it to happen, and you meant to hide it from me. Both of you. How many of you knew?" I looked around the room at the faces of women I'd considered friends, women I'd invited into my home to celebrate what I'd thought was my best friend's happiness. The silence was answer enough. "Get out," I said quietly. "All of you, get out of my house." "Mia," David started. "Get out," I screamed, and the sound surprised even me. "All of you, get out right now." They left in a flurry of whispered apologies and hastily gathered purses. Sarah lingered the longest, her face streaked with tears, trying to find words that didn't exist. Finally, David took her arm and helped her toward the door. "We need to talk about this," he said to me as they reached the threshold. "No," I said, my voice deadly calm now. "We don't. There's nothing left to talk about." After they were gone, I stood alone in my perfectly decorated living room, surrounded by the remnants of the party I'd planned with such care. Pink and blue streamers hung like accusations from the ceiling. Half-opened baby gifts sat scattered across the coffee table, tiny clothes and soft blankets for a baby that should have been mine. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of wine, something I'd been avoiding for months in case I was pregnant. The irony of that wasn't lost on me either. Then I sat at my kitchen table and stared out the window at the garden David and I had planted together last spring, back when I'd still believed we were building a life together. My phone buzzed with text messages. Sarah, David, even some of the women from the party trying to explain, to apologize, to somehow make sense of the wreckage they'd left behind. I turned it off without reading them. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the yard. In a few hours, it would be dark, and I would still be sitting here, trying to figure out how my entire life had collapsed in the space of a single afternoon. Trying to understand how the two people I'd trusted most in the world had betrayed me so completely. But mostly, I was trying to figure out what came next. Because one thing was clear: the life I'd been living, the future I'd been planning, the woman I'd been, all of that was over now. The question was, who was I going to become? I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw David's face as he delivered his devastating news, or Sarah's tears as she finally admitted the truth. So I sat in my kitchen until dawn, drinking coffee and watching the sun rise over the garden that no longer felt like mine. David didn't come home. At some point during the night, I'd heard his car pull into the driveway, but he'd left again after only a few minutes. Probably just grabbing clothes, I thought. Or maybe he'd lost his nerve, unable to face me after what he'd done. My phone had been buzzing constantly since I'd turned it back on at 6 a.m. Missed calls from my sister Emma, from my mother, from several of the women who'd been at the party. Word traveled fast in our social circle, and by now, everyone would know. The thought made my stomach churn. I'd become the subject of gossip. The woman who didn't know her husband was having an affair with her best friend. The woman who threw a baby shower for her husband's pregnant mistress. The sound of a key in the front door made me look up from my untouched breakfast. David appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking like he'd slept in his car. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair disheveled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that might have made me feel sorry for him if I were a different person. If he were a different person. "We need to talk," he said, his voice hoarse. "I told you last night, there's nothing to talk about." I didn't look at him, focusing instead on stirring my coffee, even though I hadn't added anything to it. "Mia, please, let me explain." "Explain what?" I finally met his eyes, and he flinched at whatever he saw in mine. "Explain how you've been lying to me for 8 months? Explain how you got my best friend pregnant while I was taking fertility drugs that made me sick every morning. Explain how you let me plan a baby shower for your child." He pulled out the chair across from me and sat down heavily. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. "How was it supposed to happen, David? Were you planning to wait until the baby was born? Until I'd spent months watching Sarah's belly grow with your child, helping her prepare the nursery, buying gifts for baby clothes? When exactly was the right time to tell me you destroyed our marriage? I wanted to tell you sooner. We both did. But we didn't know how, and then time kept passing, and it got harder and harder to find the right moment." I laughed, a sound devoid of any humor. "The right moment? David, there is no right moment to tell your wife you've been cheating on her. There's no right moment to tell your best friend you've been sleeping with her husband. It's not just an affair," he said quietly, and something in his tone made me look at him more carefully. "I love her, Mia. I'm in love with Sarah." The words hit me like a slap. Somehow, hearing him say he loved her was worse than hearing about the baby. The baby was a consequence, a result of poor choices and weak moments, but love meant this had been deliberate. Love meant he'd chosen her over me, not just physically but emotionally. "How long?" I asked. "How long what? How long have you been in love with her?" He was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. "I don't know. Maybe longer than I want to admit. Maybe longer than the 8 months. I felt something break inside me, something that had been holding me together since yesterday afternoon. Before we got married? No," he said quickly. "No, when we got married, I loved you. I meant those vows, Mia. I did, but not anymore." "It's complicated." "It's really not." I stood up, needing to move, needing to put distance between us. "You love her. You're having a baby with her. You don't love me anymore. It's actually very simple." "I do love you," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Just differently now. We've been through so much with the fertility issues and we've grown apart. And Sarah was there when I needed someone to talk to. Sarah was there when you needed someone to talk to. I turned to face him, and he had the grace to look ashamed. I was there, David. I was your wife. I was going through the same fertility struggles you were. Why didn't you talk to me? Because you were handling it so much better than I was. You were so strong, so determined. You never seemed to doubt that we'd eventually get pregnant. But I was starting to wonder if maybe it wasn't meant to be, if maybe we were fighting for something that wasn't going to happen. So you decided to make it happen with someone else. It wasn't like that. Sarah was going through her own problems with Mark. He was never home, never interested in starting a family. She felt like he didn't want her anymore. And I felt like maybe you were more in love with the idea of having a baby than you were with me. I stared at him, genuinely shocked. How can you say that? Everything I was doing was for us, for our future family. I wanted your baby, David. I wanted to create a life with you. But when was the last time we talked about anything else? When was the last time we went on a date that didn't revolve around your ovulation schedule? When was the last time we made love because we wanted each other, not because you'd gotten a positive result on an ovulation test? His words stung because there was truth in them. Our relationship had become clinical, scheduled, focused entirely on the goal of conception, but that didn't excuse what he'd done. That didn't justify betraying me with my best friend. So you're saying this is my fault? No, he said quickly. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we both stopped being happy, and we both stopped trying to fix it. The difference is, you threw yourself into trying to get pregnant, and you threw yourself into Sarah. He winced. Yes. The doorbell rang, interrupting our conversation. David and I looked at each other, neither wanting to deal with whoever was on the other side of that door. The bell rang again, followed by a series of sharp knocks. Mia! Mia! I know you're in there. Open the door. Emma. My sister's voice carried the tone she'd used when we were children, and she was determined to protect me from playground bullies. I walked to the front door and opened it, grateful for the interruption, despite not wanting to face anyone. Emma took one look at my face and pulled me into a fierce hug. Oh, honey, she whispered, I'm so sorry. Behind her stood my mother, her face tight with the kind of anger I'd rarely seen from her. She looked past me to where David was hovering in the kitchen doorway. You, she said, pointing at him with one perfectly manicured finger, get out of this house right now. Mrs. Chen, I think Mia and I should finish our conversation. I said get out. My mother's voice could have frozen water. You've done enough damage. You've hurt my daughter enough. If you have any decency left, you'll leave her alone to process this. David looked at me, and I could see he wanted to argue, wanted to keep trying to explain himself. But I was exhausted by his explanations, tired of hearing how our marriage had failed, how I'd somehow pushed him into another woman's arms. She's right, I said quietly. You should go. Where am I supposed to go? I don't care. That's not my problem anymore. He stood there for another moment, looking like he wanted to say something else. Finally, he grabbed his keys from the counter and walked past us toward the door. Mia, he said, pausing on the threshold. This doesn't have to mean we're over. We can get through this if we both want to. I looked at him, really looked at him, for what felt like the first time in months. The man I'd married 5 years ago, the man I'd planned to grow old with. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by his choices. You're having a baby with another woman, I said. A woman who was supposed to be my best friend. You just told me you're in love with her. How exactly do you think we get through that? Couples counseling. We could try to rebuild what we had before. What we had before is gone, David. You killed it. And even if we could somehow get past the affair, there's still going to be a baby. Your baby. With her. That child is going to be a permanent reminder of what you did. And I can't live with that constant pain. He opened his mouth to respond, but I closed the door before he could say anything else. Through the window, I watched him get into his car and drive away, probably headed to Sarah's house. The thought of them together, comforting each other over the inconvenience of having to tell me the truth, made my stomach turn. Come on, Emma said, taking my arm. Let's sit down. We went back to the kitchen, where my mother immediately started making tea with the kind of efficiency that suggested she was trying to keep her hands busy so she wouldn't have to think about what she really wanted to do to my soon-to-be ex-husband. "How did you find out?" I asked Emma. "Jenny called me last night, Sarah's sister. She was at the shower and felt terrible about how everything happened. She said the whole thing was supposed to stay secret until after the baby was born, but David just snapped yesterday. Why did he do it like that? Why did he tell me in front of everyone?" Emma and my mother exchanged a look that suggested they knew more than they were saying. "What?" I asked. "What aren't you telling me?" My mother set a cup of tea in front of me and sat down with a sigh. "According to Jenny, Sarah was planning to tell you after the baby was born. She was going to say that she and Mark had separated and that David was going to help her raise the child as a friend. She was going to lie to me even after the baby was here." "It gets worse," Emma said gently. "David didn't want to wait that long. He's been pushing her to tell you for weeks. And yesterday, when he saw you putting so much effort into the baby shower, so happy and excited for her, I think he just couldn't stand it anymore. So he decided to destroy my life in front of 20 people instead of having a private conversation. Jenny thinks he was hoping that having witnesses would make it easier somehow. Like, maybe you wouldn't react as badly if other people were there." I thought about that, about David's expression yesterday as he'd looked around the room before dropping his bombshell. Had he really thought that having an audience would soften the blow, or had he simply wanted to hurt me as much as possible? "There's something else," my mother said carefully. "Jenny mentioned that Sarah is planning to keep the baby. She's not considering adoption or anything else." The implication hung in the air between us. David was going to be a father. He was going to have the family he'd apparently given up hope of having with me. And Sarah, who'd struggled with her own fertility issues before this pregnancy, was going to have the baby she'd always wanted. The only person who wasn't getting what they wanted was me. "I need to call a lawyer," I said suddenly. "Honey, you don't have to make any decisions right now," Emma said. "Take some time to process this." "No," I shook my head, feeling something shift inside me, a kind of clarity I hadn't experienced since yesterday afternoon. "I need to call a lawyer today. I need to start divorce proceedings before David tries to claim that this is somehow salvageable." My mother reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Are you sure? Once I start down that path, I can begin to rebuild my life. Mom, he's having a baby with another woman. A woman who pretended to be my friend while carrying my husband's child. There's no coming back from that." As I said the words, I felt a strange sense of relief. For months, I'd been fighting for a marriage that was already over, trying to create a family with a man who was building one with someone else. Now, at least, I knew where I stood. I was starting over, whether I wanted to or not. The question was no longer how to save my marriage. The question was how to survive its destruction and find a way to be happy again. The thought terrified me. But for the first time since yesterday, it also gave me something I hadn't had in a long time, a sense of purpose. 3 weeks after the baby shower, I was sitting in my lawyer's office, listening to Janet Morrison explain the intricacies of no-fault divorce law while I tried to process how my life had become something that required legal expertise to untangle. "The good news is that Washington is a community property state," Janet was saying, her voice crisp and professional. "That means you're entitled to half of everything acquired during the marriage. The house, the savings accounts, his retirement fund, even the value of his medical practice." I nodded, though honestly, I was having trouble caring about money. 3 weeks ago, I'd been a married woman planning for a future that included children and growing old with the man I loved. Now I was learning about asset division and spousal support like I was studying for a test I'd never wanted to take. "What about the baby?" I asked. "Does that affect anything?" Janet's expression softened slightly. "The child he's having with Sarah, is it? That doesn't legally impact your divorce settlement, but it might affect any potential alimony. since he'll have child support obligations. Child support. David was going to be paying child support for a baby that should have been ours. The irony was so cruel it was almost funny. Almost. "There is one thing I need to ask you about," Janet continued, pulling out a manila folder. "When I was reviewing your financial records, I noticed some unusual transfers from your joint savings account. Large sums, going back about 6 months." She slid a bank statement across the desk to me. I looked at the highlighted entries and felt my stomach drop. Withdrawals of $5,000, $3,000, $8,000, amounts I definitely would have noticed if I'd been paying attention to anything other than ovulation schedules and doctor appointments. "I don't understand," I said. "I never authorized these withdrawals." "They were made by David. He has access to the account, so technically he didn't need your authorization. But the amounts and frequency are concerning." "Do you have any idea what he might have used this money for?" I stared at the numbers, my mind racing. $30,000 over 6 months. That was money we'd been saving for fertility treatments, for the future family we'd been planning. Money I'd contributed to from my own salary, thinking it was going toward our shared goals. Could it be related to the affair, I asked. "It's possible. Expensive dinners, hotel rooms, gifts. Affairs can be costly. But this amount of money suggests something more significant." My phone buzzed with a text message, and I glanced at it automatically. It was from David. "Can we please talk? There are things you need to know before the lawyers get involved." I showed the message to Janet, who raised an eyebrow. "It's up to you, but I'd recommend against meeting with him without me present. And I definitely want to know about those bank withdrawals before any conversation takes place." After leaving Janet's office, I drove aimlessly around town, trying to decide what to do. I'd been avoiding David's calls and messages for 3 weeks, communicating only through lawyers when necessary. But the bank statements had raised new questions, and despite everything he'd done, I found myself curious about what else I might not know about my own life. I ended up at Meridian Park, the place where David had proposed to me 4 years ago. It was a poor choice for someone trying to avoid painful memories, but somehow I needed to be there, needed to remember who I'd been when I'd said yes to marrying him. I was sitting on the bench where he'd gotten down on one knee when my phone rang. Emma's name appeared on the screen. "Hey," I answered. "Hey yourself. How did the lawyer meeting go?" "Complicated. It turns out David withdrew $30,000 from our savings account over the past 6 months, and I had no idea." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then, "Mia, I need to tell you something. Can you meet me at Rosario's? I'm already here." Something in her tone made my stomach clench. "What's wrong? Just come, please." 20 minutes later, I was sliding into a booth across from my sister at our favorite Mexican restaurant. Emma looked nervous, which was unusual for her. She was typically the calm one in our family, the problem solver who approached everything with logic and measured responses. "Okay," I said. "What's going on? And don't tell me it's nothing, because you look like you're about to deliver bad news." Emma took a deep breath. "I've been debating whether to tell you this for weeks. Part of me thinks you have enough to deal with already. But after what you just told me about the money, Emma, you're scaring me. I hired a private investigator." I stared at her. "You what?" After the baby shower, I was so angry at David and Sarah that I couldn't think straight. I kept thinking there had to be more to the story, things you didn't know. So I called a friend of mine who works in corporate security, and he recommended someone. "You hired someone to spy on my husband?" "Ex-husband. And yes, I did. I'm sorry if you think I overstepped, but I was trying to protect you." I didn't know whether to be angry or grateful. "What did you find?" Emma pulled out a manila envelope and set it on the table between us. "The affair started 10 months ago, not 8, like David told you. And it didn't start because they were both having marriage problems. It started because Sarah came to David with a business proposition." "What kind of business proposition?" "She wanted him to get her pregnant." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What?" "According to the investigator, Sarah's been trying to get pregnant for 3 years. She and Mark went through multiple rounds of IVF, all unsuccessful. The doctors told them it was likely Mark's sperm quality, low count, poor motility. Sarah became obsessed with having a baby, and Mark was getting tired of the constant medical interventions. I felt like I was going to be sick. So she asked my husband to father her child? That's what it looks like. The investigator found emails between them going back almost a year. At first, it was just Sarah venting about her fertility struggles and Mark's reluctance to continue with treatments. But then, she started asking David about his own fertility, about whether your problems conceiving might be related to you rather than him. And David went along with this? Emma opened the envelope and pulled out several printed emails. See for yourself. With shaking hands, I read the correspondence between my husband and my best friend. The early emails were innocent enough. Sarah complaining about Mark's lack of interest in having children, David commiserating about our own struggles. But gradually, the tone shifted. I keep wondering if Mark is the problem, Sarah had written in one email. The doctors say his numbers are borderline, but what if it's more than that? What if I'll never get pregnant with him? David's response: have you considered that maybe you need to explore other options? I mean, if Mark isn't fully committed to this process. And then, 2 emails later, Sarah's bombshell. I know this might sound crazy, but I keep thinking about what you said about exploring options. What if the option I need to explore is a different father? Someone who's proven to be fertile, someone who wants children as much as I do. This is insane, I whispered, looking up at Emma. She was planning this. She deliberately set out to get pregnant by my husband. It gets worse, Emma said gently. Keep reading. I flipped through more emails, watching their relationship evolve from friendship to conspiracy to affair. David had initially resisted Sarah's suggestion, but she'd been persistent, pointing out that their spouses were both obstacles to their dreams of parenthood. Mia doesn't even know if she can get pregnant, Sarah had written. She's been trying for over a year with no success. What if you're wasting your chance at fatherhood with someone who can't give you children? What if we could help each other get what we want? David's resistance had crumbled over the course of several weeks. The emails showed him gradually warming to the idea, especially after a particularly frustrating doctor's appointment where our fertility specialist had suggested more invasive testing. Maybe Sarah's right, he'd written. Maybe we're both settling for marriages that aren't giving us what we need. Maybe it's time to take control of our own destinies. The final email in the chain was dated just days before I now knew their physical relationship had begun. I've thought about this from every angle, David had written. If we're careful, if we're smart about this, we could both have what we want. I could be a father, you could be a mother, and no one has to get hurt. No one has to get hurt. I set the papers down and stared across the restaurant, trying to process what I'd just read. This hadn't been a case of 2 people falling in love and making a mistake. This had been a calculated plan to deceive their spouses and create a baby together. The money, I said suddenly, the $30,000, what was that for? Emma pulled out another set of documents. Fertility treatments, but not for you and David, for Sarah. Apparently, even with David as the father, she was having trouble conceiving naturally. So they were paying for ovulation medications, hormone treatments, even a few rounds of IUI. They were using our savings to help her get pregnant with his baby. Money from both your accounts and Mark's, according to the financial records. David was telling you the withdrawals were for your own fertility treatments, and he was telling Sarah the money was his contribution to their project. I felt dizzy. Every part of my life for the past year had been a lie. While I'd been taking vitamins and charting my cycles and hoping each month that this would be the time David and I finally conceived, he'd been actively working to create a family with another woman, using our money to do it. There's one more thing, Emma said quietly. The investigator found evidence that Sarah was also lying to Mark about the money. She told him it was for a new round of treatments using his sperm, but she was actually using it for the treatments with David. So all 3 of us were being lied to. All 3 of you were being used. I leaned back in the booth, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the deception. This wasn't just about an affair or even about unplanned pregnancy resulting from poor choices. This was about 2 people who had systematically manipulated and betrayed their spouses in service of their own desires. I have to confront them, I said. Mia, I don't think that's a good idea. You're already getting divorced, and this information will help Janet with the settlement. There's no reason to put yourself through a confrontation. But I was already pulling out my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found David's number. He'd been asking to talk for weeks. Now I had plenty to talk about. David, I said when he answered, we need to meet. Tonight. Mia, God, I'm so glad you called. I've been wanting to explain. 7 o'clock, Meridian Park. Bring Sarah. I don't think Sarah should be there. She's been having a difficult pregnancy and the stress. Bring her, David. Or I'm going to show up at her house with a process server and a very interesting collection of emails. Your choice. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then, okay, we'll be there. I hung up and looked at Emma, who was shaking her head. This is a bad idea, Mia. Maybe, but I need to hear them admit what they did. I need to look them in the eye and hear them explain how they justified destroying 3 marriages for their own selfish desires. What are you going to accomplish? You already know the truth. I'm going to get closure, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure what that meant. And I'm going to make sure they understand that I know exactly what they did, that I'm not the naive, oblivious wife they thought I was. At 7 o'clock, I was sitting on the same park bench where David had proposed, watching him and Sarah walk toward me across the grass. Sarah looked enormous now. She'd be due in just a few weeks, and she was moving slowly, one hand pressed against her lower back. David had his arm around her waist, supporting her, and the sight of his protective gesture toward the woman carrying his child made something twist painfully in my chest. They sat down on the bench across from me, close enough to talk, but far enough away that I didn't have to smell Sarah's familiar perfume or see the wedding ring David was still wearing. Thank you for agreeing to meet, David said. I know this has been incredibly difficult for you, and I want you to know how sorry we both are about the way you found out. Sorry about the way I found out, I repeated. Not sorry about what you did, just sorry about the timing. Sarah shifted uncomfortably. Mia, we never wanted to hurt you. We know how this looks, but it's not what you think. Really? What do I think, Sarah? You think we planned this to hurt you. You think we set out to destroy your marriage, but that's not what happened. We fell in love, and sometimes love doesn't follow the rules we want it to follow. I pulled out the manila envelope Emma had given me and set it on the bench beside me. Both David and Sarah's eyes went to it immediately. Love, I said. Is that what you call a 10-month conspiracy to get pregnant using my husband's sperm and my savings account? The color drained from both their faces. I know about the emails, I continued. I know about the fertility treatments you paid for with money stolen from Mark and me. I know this wasn't some spontaneous affair that resulted in an unplanned pregnancy. I know you orchestrated this entire thing because you decided you wanted a baby more than you wanted to honor your marriage vows. David leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. Mia, let me explain. Explain what? Explain how you told your pregnant mistress that maybe I was the reason we couldn't conceive. Explain how you decided that my dream of having children with my husband was less important than her dream of having children with my husband. It wasn't like that, Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. We were both so desperate. We'd both been trying for so long, and our marriages were falling apart anyway. Our marriage was not falling apart. I stood up, my voice echoing across the park. Our marriage was going through a difficult time because we were struggling with fertility issues. That's not the same as falling apart. People work through those problems, Sarah. They go to counseling, they support each other, they find ways to reconnect. They don't conspire with their spouse's best friend to create secret families. You weren't paying attention to David's needs, Sarah said, and I could hear desperation creeping into her voice. He told me how clinical everything had become between you two, how you'd stopped being a wife and become just a woman obsessed with getting pregnant. And you decided that justified stealing my husband? I decided that we both deserved to be happy. David wanted to be a father and you weren't able to give him that. We don't know that, I was shouting now, and part of me was embarrassed by the scene we were creating, but a larger part of me didn't care. We don't know if I can't get pregnant because my husband was too busy getting you pregnant to find out, David finally spoke up. Mia, please sit down. Let's try to discuss this rationally. Rationally? I laughed, a sound that came out harsh and bitter. David, there is nothing rational about what you did. You stole money from our joint account to pay for fertility treatments for another woman. You lied to me for 10 months while conducting a deliberate campaign to father someone else's child. You let me plan a baby shower for your pregnant mistress. Which part of that seems rational to you? We were going to tell you, Sarah said. After the baby was born, we were going to sit down with you and Mark and explain everything. We were going to try to find a way to make this work for everyone. Make it work for everyone? I stared at her in disbelief. Sarah, you were going to present me with the fait accompli of my husband's child and expect me to what exactly? Babysit while you two played house? Attend family gatherings where I got to watch David be the father to your baby that he never got to be to mine? We thought maybe you could be part of the child's life, like an aunt. The words hit me like a slap. You wanted me to be an aunt to my husband's baby, the baby he had with my best friend while lying to me about our own fertility problems. Mia, David said quietly, I know this sounds terrible when you put it like that, but we were trying to find a solution that would work for everyone. We thought maybe if we could all be mature about this. Mature? I turned to look at him fully for the first time since they'd arrived. David, you want to know what mature looks like. Mature looks like going to marriage counseling when you're feeling disconnected from your wife. Mature looks like having honest conversations about your fertility fears instead of seeking comfort from someone else. Mature looks like ending your marriage before starting a new relationship, not conducting a secret affair while stealing money from your spouse. You're right, he said, and for a moment, he looked like the man I'd married. You're absolutely right. We handled this in the worst possible way, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Mia. Sorry doesn't fix this, David. Sorry doesn't give me back the year I spent thinking we were working toward the same goal. Sorry doesn't return the money you stole, or undo the lies you told, or erase the humiliation of finding out about your affair in front of 20 people. Sarah was crying harder now, her hands pressed protectively over her belly. What do you want from us? What can we possibly do to make this better? You can stop lying, I said. You can stop pretending this was some grand love story that just happened to collide with inconvenient marriages. You can admit that you made a selfish, calculated decision to get what you wanted at the expense of everyone else's happiness. Fine, Sarah said, her voice suddenly sharp. Fine. You want the truth? Yes, I planned this. Yes, I convinced David to help me get pregnant because I was desperate for a baby and my husband couldn't give me one. Yes, I used your money, and yes, I lied to Mark, and yes, I let you plan a baby shower while knowing exactly whose baby I was carrying. I did all of that because I wanted a child more than I wanted to protect your feelings. The honesty was like a punch to the gut, even though I'd already known it was true. Hearing her say it out loud, hearing the defiance in her voice, made it real in a way that reading emails hadn't. Thank you, I said quietly. That's the first honest thing you've said to me in 10 months. And you know what else? Sarah continued, apparently deciding that since she'd started with honesty, she might as well continue. I don't regret it. I'm having the baby I've wanted for years, with a man who actually wants to be a father, and I can't bring myself to regret that, no matter how much it's hurt you. David looked shocked by her words. Sarah, it's not what, David? It's not how you feel, because you told me just last week that you've never been happier than you are now, knowing you're going to be a father. I felt something settle inside me as I watched them, something that might have been relief. For months, I'd been wondering if I'd somehow failed as a wife, if I'd driven David away through my obsession with getting pregnant. But looking at them now, seeing Sarah's complete lack of remorse and David's obvious discomfort with her honesty, I realized that this had never been about me. This had been about two selfish people who decided they deserved to have what they wanted, regardless of the cost to others. "You're right," I said to Sarah. "You're going to have the baby you wanted, with the father you chose. And David, you're going to get to be a father, just like you wanted. Congratulations. I hope it's everything you dreamed it would be." I picked up the envelope and stood to leave. "Mia, wait!" David called after me. "What happens now?" I turned back to look at them one last time. David, with his guilty expression and rumpled clothes. Sarah, with her defiant tears and protective hands over her belly. They looked like what they were, two people who'd blown up their lives and everyone else's to get what they wanted. "Now you get to live with the consequences of your choices," I said. "Both of you. Mark is filing for divorce too, by the way, so you'll both be free to start over together just like you planned. The only difference is that now you get to do it without any of the money you stole, because my lawyer is going to make sure I get every penny back, plus damages for emotional distress." "You can't do that," Sarah said. "That money was for medical treatments. Medical treatments you obtained under false pretenses using funds that didn't belong to you. I absolutely can do that, and I will." I started walking away, then turned back one more time. "Oh, and Sarah, you're right that you don't have to regret your choices. But you should probably prepare yourself for the fact that building a relationship on lies and betrayal isn't the solid foundation for parenthood that you seem to think it is. Good luck with that." As I walked back to my car, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Peace. Not happiness, not closure exactly, but a sense that I finally understood what I was dealing with. I wasn't the victim of a tragic love story or the casualty of irreconcilable differences. I was simply the person who'd gotten in the way of two people who decided they deserved to have what they wanted, regardless of who got hurt in the process. For the first time since the baby shower, I felt like I could start planning for a future that didn't include them. It wasn't the future I'd wanted, but at least it was mine. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new apartment, surrounded by moving boxes and trying to figure out where to hang the artwork I'd bought for my fresh start. The divorce had been finalized 3 weeks ago, and I'd closed on the sale of the house David and I had shared just yesterday. It felt surreal to be starting over at 32, but also oddly liberating. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "How's the unpacking going? Need help hanging pictures?" I smiled as I typed back, "Always. Bring wine." She arrived an hour later with a bottle of expensive champagne and a toolkit that would have impressed a professional contractor. "We're celebrating your new life properly," she announced, kissing my cheek. "None of that cheap stuff." As we worked together to transform my empty apartment into something that felt like home, I found myself thinking about how much had changed since that devastating afternoon at the baby shower. The woman who'd planned that party, the woman who'd focused all her energy on getting pregnant and saving her marriage, felt like a stranger to me now. "Have you heard anything about them lately?" Emma asked as she held a level against the wall while I marked where to hang my favorite painting. "About David and Sarah?" I considered the question. Not directly, but Janet mentioned that David's been struggling financially. Apparently child support and alimony payments are more expensive than he anticipated, especially since his practice lost several clients after word got around about the affair. "Good," Emma said fiercely. "Actions have consequences." I'd heard through mutual friends that Sarah had given birth to a healthy baby boy 3 months ago. According to the Gossip Network, she and David were living together in a small apartment across town, trying to make their unconventional family work. Mark had moved to Portland after their divorce was finalized and apparently wanted nothing to do with any of them. "Do you ever wonder what you'd be doing right now if none of this had happened?" Emma asked. "You mean if David and I were still married and trying to get pregnant?" I thought about it as I hammered a nail into the wall. Probably sitting in another doctor's office, discussing our next steps. maybe considering IVF or adoption, still putting my life on hold while chasing something that might never happen. Do you miss it? The trying, I mean. It was a question I'd been asking myself a lot lately. For 2 years, getting pregnant had been the central focus of my life. Every decision had been filtered through the lens of how it might affect my fertility. Every month had been measured by the hope and disappointment of my cycle. Giving up that quest had been devastating at first, but also oddly freeing. I miss the dream of it, I said finally. I miss the idea of creating a family with someone I loved. But I don't miss the stress or the clinical approach to everything or the way it consumed every aspect of my life. And now, I'm figuring out who I am when I'm not trying to be someone's wife or someone's mother. It's terrifying and exciting at the same time. We worked in comfortable silence for a while, hanging pictures and arranging furniture until my apartment started to feel like a real home. As the sun began to set, we opened the champagne and sat on my new couch, admiring our handiwork. "I have news," Emma said suddenly. "Good news or bad news? Depends on your perspective. I ran into Jenny at the grocery store yesterday, Sarah's sister." I took a sip of champagne and waited. Apparently, things aren't going well for the happy couple. David's been working constantly trying to keep his practice afloat, which means Sarah's been home alone with the baby most of the time. She's been calling her family constantly, complaining that motherhood isn't what she expected and that David isn't as involved as she thought he'd be. "Karma's a bitch," I said, though I felt no satisfaction in hearing about their problems. "There's more. Jenny says Sarah's been asking about you, wondering how you're doing, whether you're dating anyone, if you seem happy." "Why would she care?" "I think she's realizing that destroying your marriage didn't automatically create the perfect life she'd imagined for herself. Reality has a way of being messier than fantasy." I thought about that as I looked around my apartment. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was mine. I'd started taking art classes on weekends, something I'd always wanted to do, but never had time for when every free moment was consumed by fertility appointments. I'd been promoted at work, taking on new challenges that I'd previously turned down because they might interfere with getting pregnant. I'd even started dating again, though nothing serious yet. "You know what the strangest part is?" I said. "I think I'm happier now than I was a year ago. Not because of what happened, I wouldn't wish that betrayal on anyone, but because I finally know who I am when I'm not trying to be what someone else wants me to be." Emma raised her glass. "Two new beginnings. Two new beginnings," I agreed. My phone rang just as we finished our toast. The number was unfamiliar, but something made me answer. "Hello? Mia? This is Dr. Patterson from Seattle Fertility Center." I felt my stomach clench automatically, even though I'd stopped being a patient there months ago. "Hi, Dr. Patterson. I think there might be some mistake. I'm not scheduled for any appointments." "I know, and I apologize for calling you at home, but I received some test results today that I thought you should know about. Are you familiar with a patient named David Chen?" My throat went dry. "He's my ex-husband." "I see. Well, mister, Jen came in last month for some fertility testing. Apparently he and his partner are considering trying for another child, and they wanted to establish baseline values for his sperm quality. Another child. David and Sarah were already trying to get pregnant again. The thought should have hurt, but mostly I felt sorry for them. They'd blown up 4 lives to have one baby, and they were already planning to expand their family. The thing is, Dr. Patterson continued, the results were quite surprising. Mr. Chen's sperm count and motility are significantly below normal ranges. Based on these numbers, natural conception would be extremely unlikely, if not impossible. I sat down heavily, trying to process what he was telling me. "I'm sorry, what?" "Without intervention, IVF with ICSI specifically, Mr. Chen would have virtually no chance of fathering a child naturally. These aren't borderline numbers, Mrs. Chen. These are results that would typically require immediate medical intervention." "But he has a child," I said stupidly. "His partner just gave birth 3 months ago." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I see. Well, That would be highly unusual given these test results. Of course, sperm quality can fluctuate over time, and there are rare cases where natural conception occurs despite poor parameters. He was being polite, but I could hear the doubt in his voice. And suddenly, everything clicked into place. "Dr. Patterson," I said carefully, "hypothetically speaking, if someone with these test results did father a child, what would that suggest?" Another pause. "Hypothetically, it would suggest that either the test results were anomalous, which is unlikely given that we ran the analysis twice, or that natural conception didn't actually occur. There are other possibilities, of course, but those would be the most likely explanations." After I hung up, I sat staring at my phone while Emma watched me with growing concern. "Mia, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I think Sarah cheated on David too," I said slowly. "What?" I explained about the phone call, about David's test results, and what they implied about the baby Sarah had supposedly conceived with him. "But wait," Emma said, her legal mind immediately going to the implications. "If David isn't the father of Sarah's baby, then who is?" "I don't know, but I think I know how to find out." The next morning, I called Janet Morrison and explained the situation. She listened without interrupting, then was quiet for a long moment. "This changes things significantly," she finally said. "If David isn't the biological father of Sarah's child, then he's been paying child support for a baby that isn't his. That's fraud. What can we do about it? We can petition the court to order a paternity test. If David isn't the father, you'd likely be entitled to additional damages for the emotional distress caused by the deception, and David would be able to stop paying child support immediately. Even though he believed he was the father, intent matters in these cases. If Sarah deliberately deceived him about paternity, that's a form of fraud that the courts take very seriously. Indeed, I thought about David, working constantly to support a child that might not even be his, while his relationship with Sarah deteriorated under the stress of new parenthood and financial difficulties. Part of me felt vindicated. They'd both been lying and manipulating people for their own gain, and now they were facing the consequences. But another part of me felt almost sorry for him. 2 weeks later, I was back in Janet's office, reading the results of the court-ordered paternity test. David was not the biological father of Sarah's son. According to the DNA analysis, the child's father was Mark, Sarah's ex-husband, the man she'd claimed was unable to get her pregnant. "So she was lying about everything," I said, setting down the papers. "She lied to Mark about why their marriage was failing. She lied to David about needing his help to get pregnant. She lied to me about whose baby she was carrying. She was already pregnant with Mark's child when she started the affair with David." "It appears that way," Janet confirmed. "The timeline suggests she conceived shortly before beginning her relationship with your ex-husband, then used the affair as cover for the pregnancy when she realized Mark would leave her anyway. Why would she do that? Why not just tell Mark she was pregnant with his baby? Based on the emails your sister's investigator found, it seems like Sarah knew her marriage was over regardless. Mark had already told her he didn't want children and was planning to leave. By convincing David he was the father, she secured financial support and a committed partner who wanted to raise the child." I leaned back in my chair, overwhelmed by the complexity of Sarah's deception. She hadn't just destroyed my marriage for love, or even for the chance to have a baby with someone who wanted children. She destroyed it as part of an elaborate con to ensure she wouldn't be a single mother. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now David stops paying child support and we file a civil suit against Sarah for fraud. You'll likely recover the money that was stolen from your accounts, plus significant additional damages. David will probably file his own suit as well. And the baby, that's between Sarah and Mark to figure out. Mark has been notified about the paternity results and is apparently considering his options." As I left Janet's office, I found myself thinking about that baby, Sarah's son, who had no idea that his entire origin story was built on lies and manipulation. He was innocent in all of this, the product of his mother's desperation and dishonesty. I hoped he'd grow up loved and wanted, despite the chaos surrounding his birth. My phone rang as I was driving home. David's name appeared on the screen, and after a moment's hesitation, I answered. "Mia, I just got the paternity results." His voice sounded hollow, defeated. "I know. I'm sorry, David. Are you? Because I wouldn't blame you if you felt vindicated right now." I considered the question seriously. "I'm sorry that you were lied to and manipulated. I'm sorry that you're going through the pain of finding out someone you trusted deceived you about something so fundamental. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. But I'm not sorry that the truth came out. And I'm not sorry that there are finally consequences for what both of you did to Mark and me." There was a long pause. "I know I don't have the right to ask this, but I need you to know that I never intended for any of this to happen. When Sarah first suggested that I might be able to help her get pregnant, I thought she was talking about emotional support, maybe helping her convince Mark to try IVF again. I had no idea she was already pregnant or that she was planning to use me as cover. But you did have the affair, David. Even if you're not the baby's father, you still chose to cheat on me with my best friend. I know, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. Not just because of how it hurt you, but because it made me complicit in something so much worse than I realized. What will you do now? I don't know. Move out, I guess. Try to figure out how to rebuild my life. Sarah and we were only together because of the baby. Without that, there's nothing left." After I hung up, I sat in my car for a few minutes, processing everything that had happened. A year ago, I'd been a married woman desperately trying to get pregnant with my husband. Today, I was a divorced woman who discovered that her entire marriage had been destroyed as part of an elaborate fraud. But despite everything, the betrayal, the lies, the devastating revelation at the baby shower that had started it all, I realized I felt something I hadn't expected: gratitude. I was grateful that the truth had finally come out. Grateful that I'd learned who David and Sarah really were before wasting more years of my life on people who were capable of such deception. Grateful that I'd been forced to discover who I was when I wasn't trying to be what someone else wanted me to be. Most of all, I was grateful for the life I was building now, a life based on honesty, self-discovery, and the knowledge that I was strong enough to survive having everything I thought I wanted taken away from me. As I drove home to my apartment, I thought about the art class I was taking that evening and the date I had planned for the weekend with someone who didn't know the old version of me, the woman who defined herself by her fertility struggles and her marriage. He only knew the woman I'd become, independent, honest, and finally comfortable with putting my own happiness first. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was mine. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. The baby shower that had destroyed my world had also set me free. I couldn't bring myself to regret that, even if I wouldn't wish the path to freedom on anyone else. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. Sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted to discover what you actually need. Sometimes the truth, no matter how painful, really does set you free.